June 2018 had been hot in Osage County, Oklahoma, but the heat wasn't what people were talking about. They were talking about the buffalo. More specifically, they were talking about the enormous white buffalo standing behind a rusted gate on 21-year-old Emily Carter's struggling farm. Emily had red hair that she usually kept tucked beneath a faded canvas cap, mud-stained work boots, and the habit of listening longer than she spoke. She had inherited 146 acres from her grandfather 6 months earlier, along with an aging John Deere 4020, a collapsing equipment shed, and more debt than she knew how to explain. The buffalo was supposed to be her first chance to recover. Instead, it became the reason everyone laughed. "That's not a breeding animal," Dale Mercer, the neighboring rancher, called from outside the fence. Emily kept tightening the gate chain. The animal behind her lifted its enormous head. Its coat was almost completely white beneath the Oklahoma sun. Its horns curved outward before sweeping upward, forming a strange symmetrical crown above its skull. Dale laughed. "Looks like somebody painted a buffalo." 2 other ranchers laughed with him. Emily didn't. She looked at the animal's shoulders, then its legs, then the way it was standing. There was something about the buffalo that bothered her. Not because it looked unusual, because it looked unusually healthy. Its breathing was slow. Its coat was clean. Its eyes were clear. It wasn't pacing, kicking, or rubbing against the fence. And when Emily walked toward it, the enormous animal turned its head and watched her without moving away. The sale trailer was scheduled to arrive Friday morning. Emily needed the money. That was the part nobody knew. The bank had given her 30 days to make a payment on the farm loan. The hay bill was overdue. Her tractor needed a hydraulic repair. The north pasture fence had 3 broken posts. Selling the buffalo would not save the farm, but it might buy her another month. So on Thursday evening, Emily stood beside the fence and watched the white animal graze. Her grandfather had called him Atlas. Emily had almost changed the name. Then she noticed something. Atlas wasn't eating where the other cattle had eaten. He kept walking toward the eastern edge of the pasture, where the grass was shorter and the soil was darker. He stopped beside an old limestone rise and began sniffing the ground. Emily frowned. "What's there?" Atlas lowered his head, then scraped the earth once with his front hoof. Emily stepped closer. The soil underneath was almost black. She crouched and rubbed it between her fingers. Moist. That made no sense. It hadn't rained in 11 days. Emily looked toward the creek bed beyond the pasture. Dry. Then back at Atlas. The buffalo scraped the same spot again. Behind Emily, an engine coughed. She turned. A county pickup had stopped beside the fence. A man in a pale work shirt stepped out. He was in his late 50s, carried a clipboard, and wore the expression of someone who had already decided what he was looking at. "Emily Carter?" She stood. "Yes, I'm Raymond Pike, county livestock inspector." His eyes moved toward Atlas. He smiled faintly. "So that's the famous buffalo." Emily didn't answer. Raymond walked closer. "You're actually selling him tomorrow?" "Yes. Best decision you've made." Emily looked at him. "Why?" Raymond glanced at Atlas's horns. "Because animals like that are expensive to feed and difficult to place." Atlas suddenly lifted his head. His ears pointed toward the far side of the pasture. Raymond stopped talking. Emily followed his gaze. Nothing was there. Just tall grass. Then came a faint metallic sound. Clink. Emily's face tightened. "Did you hear that?" Raymond shrugged. Atlas took 3 slow steps toward the sound, then stopped. The buffalo stared at the ground. Emily walked toward him. She expected another patch of strange soil. Instead, she found an old rusted metal pipe sticking 6 inches above the earth. She touched it. Cold water suddenly hissed from somewhere beneath her hand. Emily jumped back. Atlas didn't move. The pipe trembled. Then the ground beneath the buffalo gave a soft, hollow thump. Emily stared at the soil. Raymond stared too. Neither spoke. Atlas lowered his head toward the earth again. And this time, Emily noticed something she hadn't seen before. A narrow line of green grass ran beneath the entire eastern fence. It disappeared beneath the limestone ridge. Emily slowly stood. The buffalo had been finding water. But if there was water under this pasture, why had nobody told her? And why had her grandfather never mentioned it? Raymond closed his clipboard. "Forget the pipe." Emily looked at him. Why? He hesitated. For the first time since arriving, the inspector no longer looked amused. Because that pasture was surveyed 30 years ago. He looked at Atlas, and there wasn't supposed to be anything underneath it. Atlas scraped the earth again. This time, something hard struck his hoof. Emily heard it, a dull metallic knock. She crouched beside him and began digging. Emily dug with her bare hands until dirt packed beneath her fingernails. The object beneath Atlas's hoof wasn't rock. It was metal. She uncovered a rusted iron plate about the size of a dinner table, buried just below the surface. Along one edge was a faded brass tag, nearly destroyed by time. Emily wiped it with her sleeve. 3 letters remained visible. WPA. She looked at Raymond. What is that? He didn't answer immediately. The county inspector crouched beside her. Old infrastructure. From when? Depends. On what? Who built it? That wasn't an answer. Emily knew it. Raymond knew she knew it. Atlas lowered his head and sniffed the exposed metal. Then he stepped away. Emily noticed another strange thing. The buffalo wasn't interested in the plate anymore. He was staring 20 yards east, toward the limestone ridge. Emily followed his gaze. There was another patch of unusually green grass. She stood. He's finding something else. Raymond shook his head. Or you're seeing patterns that aren't there. Emily looked at Atlas. He's been standing over this spot every morning. You've had him how long? 3 months. And you've never found anything. Not until today. Raymond sighed. Then maybe today is the first day you looked. He walked back toward his truck. Emily watched him leave. But before he reached the driver's door, he turned. Don't dig around the ridge. Why? Because the county owns the easement. Emily stared at him. The county owns my pasture? No. Then why can't I dig? Raymond's expression hardened. Because some things underground aren't yours just because they're underneath your land. Then he drove away. Emily stood alone beside Atlas. The buffalo looked enormous against the evening sky. She rested one hand against his shoulder. His hide was warm. Granddad knew, she whispered. Atlas flicked one ear. Emily walked back toward the farmhouse. Inside an old desk drawer, beneath tax receipts and tractor manuals, she found her grandfather's property papers. The farm had been purchased in 1979, but one handwritten note was tucked behind the deed. Emily recognized the handwriting immediately. East pasture. Never disturb the old line. Nothing else. No explanation. No map. Just 4 words. Emily stared at them for a long time. Then she heard Atlas outside. A low bellow rolled across the pasture. Not frightened. Not angry. Calling. Emily stepped onto the porch. Atlas was facing the ridge again. And now 3 other cattle were facing it too. That had never happened before. Emily grabbed her flashlight. The sun was almost gone. She crossed the pasture. At the ridge, she found another strip of green vegetation running through the dry grass. She followed it. The line ended a depression beneath an old cottonwood tree. Emily knelt. The soil was damp again. She dug. 6 inches down, her fingers hit stone. She cleared it away. A narrow opening appeared. Cold air came through it. Emily froze. There was a tunnel underneath the pasture. She widened the opening carefully. The smell that came out wasn't sewage or decay. It smelled like clean water. She crawled closer. Then she heard it. Running water. Emily sat back. For weeks, her pasture had looked dry. But underneath it, something was flowing. The next morning, Emily called the local agricultural extension office. The woman on the phone listened quietly. Then Emily mentioned the albino buffalo. The woman laughed. Is that the white one everyone has been talking about? Emily closed her eyes. Yes. What about him? He keeps finding water. The woman stopped laughing. How? I don't know. A pause followed. Then she said, You should talk to Dr. Hannah Reed. Who is she? Livestock genetics and reproductive specialist. She works with bison and cattle populations. Emily wrote down the number. She called. No answer. She left a message. 2 hours later, her phone rang. This is Hannah Reed. Emily explained everything. The old pipe. The tunnel. The strange grass. Atlas. Dr. Reed asked only one question. What exactly does his coat look like? White. Pink skin. Mostly. Eyes. Dark. Any patches? No. Curved horns? Yes. The expert became silent. Emily waited. Finally, Dr. Reed said, "Don't sell him." Emily's grip tightened around the phone. "Why? I need to see him." "Why?" Another pause. Then Dr. Reed lowered her voice. "Because if I'm right, you're not looking at an ordinary color variation." The line went quiet. Emily looked through the farmhouse window. Atlas was standing in the pasture, motionless, watching the ridge. She swallowed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that buffalo doesn't belong on a sale trailer." Emily felt a strange pressure in her chest. "But he's white." "Exactly." The next morning, Dr. Reed arrived. She was 47, wore dusty field boots, and carried a canvas case filled with measuring tools. She didn't laugh. She didn't photograph Atlas immediately. She simply stood outside the fence and watched him. For nearly 5 minutes, she said nothing. Atlas watched her back. Then Dr. Reed walked into the pasture. Atlas didn't retreat. She approached slowly. He lowered his head. Dr. Reed placed one hand near his shoulder without touching him. She examined his legs, his jaw, his eyes, then his horns. Her expression changed. Emily noticed. "What?" Dr. Reed didn't answer. She crouched beside one of Atlas's front legs. "There." Emily looked down. A tiny dark marking was visible beneath the white hair. Dr. Reed brushed away more hair. A brand appeared. Old, faded, almost completely hidden. Emily stared. "That's my grandfather's ranch mark." Dr. Reed shook her head. "No." Emily looked at her. "Then whose is it?" Dr. Reed stood. "That's the problem." She walked around Atlas. "Your grandfather didn't breed this animal." "How do you know?" "Because this marking predates his ownership." Emily's mouth went dry. Dr. Reed looked toward the ridge, then toward the old pipe. "Where'd you find the water?" Emily pointed. Dr. Reed walked there. She crouched beside the opening. Her face changed again. "What?" Dr. Reed touched the damp stone. "This isn't a natural spring." Emily stared at her. "What is it?" Dr. Reed looked back at Atlas. "A buried irrigation system." She paused. "And judging by the construction, it's probably older than this farm." Emily felt the pieces beginning to connect. The strange buffalo, the old brand, the hidden water, her grandfather's warning, the untouched eastern pasture. But one question remained. Why would a rare white buffalo have been raised beside an abandoned irrigation system? Dr. Reed stood slowly. "I want a blood sample." Emily nodded. Dr. Reed prepared the equipment. Atlas remained calm, but as she reached for him, the buffalo suddenly turned toward the ridge. His ears went forward. Then he began walking. Dr. Reed stopped. "Wait." Atlas reached the limestone rise. He scraped the ground once, twice, 3 times. Then he pushed his nose against a loose stone. The stone moved. Behind it was a narrow cavity. Inside sat an old glass jar. Emily pulled it free. There was something rolled inside. Paper. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was faded, but Emily recognized the first word immediately. Carter. She looked at Dr. Reed. The expert's face had gone completely still. "Emily," she whispered. "What?" Dr. Reed pointed at the paper. "Your grandfather wasn't hiding the water." She swallowed. "He was hiding the buffalo." Emily read the first line 3 times before the words finally made sense. The white calf came from the southern herd in 1981. Below it, her grandfather had written a second sentence. "If they ever find out what he carries, they'll take him." Emily looked up. "Carries what?" Dr. Hannah Reed didn't answer. She carefully unfolded the rest of the paper. Most of it was a record of dates, animal numbers, and handwritten observations. Some entries were nearly 40 years old. One line had been underlined twice. Natural resistance observed during the drought. Emily frowned. Resistance to what? Dr. Reed looked toward Atlas. "That's what we need to find out." She placed the paper on the hood of her truck. The story was beginning to take shape. In the early 1980s, Emily's grandfather had apparently worked with a small herd of American bison that had been moved between ranches during a severe drought. One white calf had been born. The animal wasn't completely albino. It had a rare genetic condition affecting pigmentation. But the strange part wasn't the color. It was the calf's health. According to the notes, while other animals lost weight during drought conditions, the white calf continued grazing. While water sources disappeared, he repeatedly returned to the same areas where underground moisture remained. Emily looked at Atlas. That's him. Dr. Reed shook her head. Not exactly. Emily's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Atlas couldn't be 40 years old. Emily looked at the buffalo again. For the first time, the obvious answer felt impossible. Then where did he come from? Dr. Reed turned the paper over. There was another note. Breeding line continued. Emily slowly sat on the hood of the truck. Her grandfather hadn't been hiding one buffalo. He had been preserving a bloodline. And Atlas was apparently the latest generation. Dr. Reed took out her phone. I need to run genetic tests. Emily looked toward the road. How long? Several weeks. I don't have several weeks. Dr. Reed understood immediately. The sale. Emily nodded. The buyer comes tomorrow. Dr. Reed looked at Atlas. Cancel it. I can't. Why? Because the bank doesn't care about genetics. Emily's voice remained quiet. The payment is due Monday. Dr. Reed said nothing. Emily looked down at her muddy boots. I have $300 in the account. The expert finally understood the real problem. Emily wasn't trying to sell Atlas because she didn't value him. She was trying to save the farm that had produced him. That afternoon, Emily drove into town. The feed store was crowded. She could feel people looking at her. The white buffalo had become local entertainment. At the counter, Dale Mercer stood with two other ranchers. Here she comes, he said. Emily kept walking. Dale smiled. How's the unicorn? Someone laughed. Emily stopped. His name is Atlas. Dale shrugged. Whatever you call him, he's still a white buffalo. Emily looked at the men. He's healthy. Healthy doesn't mean valuable. The words landed harder than Emily expected. She had heard them before. But this time, she wasn't sure they were wrong. That evening, she checked Atlas carefully. His body condition was excellent. His appetite was strong. His hooves were sound. His eyes were clear. But the next morning, something changed. Atlas didn't eat. Emily found him standing beside the eastern pasture. His head was low. She checked the water trough. Full. The hay. Fresh. Nothing was wrong. Then she noticed the ground. The damp line had disappeared. The underground water had stopped flowing. Emily crouched. The soil was dry. Dr. Reed arrived an hour later. She examined the old irrigation tunnel. Something blocked it. Can we fix it? Maybe. How? Dr. Reed pointed toward the old John Deere 4020. Emily smiled faintly. My grandfather rebuilt that tractor 3 times. Then today might be number 4. They spent 6 hours clearing the old irrigation channel. The 4020 pulled a rusted chain through the earth, while Emily worked with a shovel. The machine coughed, belched smoke, then finally pulled. The buried obstruction shifted. Water suddenly burst through the channel. Emily jumped backward. A clear stream ran across the dry soil. Atlas lifted his head. He walked toward it, then stopped. He didn't drink. Instead, he turned and walked toward the far fence. Dr. Reed watched him. That's interesting. What? He knew the water was coming. Emily stared. How? Dr. Reed shook her head. We don't know. She crouched beside the flowing channel. Animals don't need to understand engineering to recognize patterns. She picked up a handful of wet soil. They can sense moisture, temperature, smell, even tiny changes in air movement. Bison are especially good at remembering landscapes. Water doesn't have to be visible for an animal to know where it is. Emily looked at Atlas. So he remembers the land. Possibly. Dr. Reed smiled. Or his ancestors taught him. The sentence stayed with Emily. That evening, the genetic report arrived by email. Dr. Reed opened it on her laptop. She read silently, then read it again. Emily waited. What? Dr. Reed finally looked up. Atlas isn't genetically identical to the historic line. Emily's shoulders dropped. But there is something. Dr. Reed enlarged the report. His markers show an unusually preserved lineage with very low genetic variation. Emily didn't understand. What does that mean? It means whoever bred these animals wasn't selecting for appearance. For what then? Dr. Reed looked at her. Adaptation. The word seemed too small for what it meant. Atlas had inherited traits that helped him handle harsh conditions. Efficient grazing, strong feet, excellent body condition, and an unusual ability to locate and repeatedly use reliable water sources. None of those traits were magical. Together, they were valuable. Very valuable. But Emily's relief lasted less than a minute. A black SUV pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out wearing a navy jacket. Behind him was the buyer scheduled to collect Atlas. He held a folder. Miss Carter. Emily stepped onto the porch. Yes, I'm Jonathan Vale. I'm here for the buffalo. Emily glanced at Dr. Reed. Jonathan opened the folder. I have the purchase agreement. Emily's heart sank. I haven't signed the final transfer. You accepted the deposit. I'll return it. Jonathan smiled. That won't be necessary. He looked past her toward Atlas. We're prepared to pay considerably more. Emily stared. How much? Jonathan named a number. Emily couldn't speak. It was more than she had ever seen in her farm account. Enough to pay the bank, repair the tractor, fix the fences, buy hay, maybe even keep the farm for another year. Dale's voice echoed in her memory. Healthy doesn't mean valuable. Emily looked at Atlas. The buffalo stood quietly in the pasture. Jonathan held out the paperwork. All you have to do is sign. Emily reached for the pen. Her fingers touched it. Then Atlas suddenly turned toward the eastern ridge. He stared at the old irrigation channel, and Emily noticed something moving beneath the water. A tiny silver flash. Then another. Then dozens. Dr. Reed stepped forward. What the hell? The water was carrying small fish. Not one or two. Hundreds. Emily looked at the dry creek bed beyond the pasture. The channel wasn't simply bringing water into the field. It was reconnecting an entire buried watershed. Dr. Reed slowly lowered the papers. Emily. What? Don't sell him. Emily looked at her. Dr. Reed's voice was barely above a whisper. Your grandfather wasn't preserving Atlas's bloodline for the buffalo. She pointed toward the flowing water. He was preserving it for this land. Emily looked across the pasture. The first dragonflies were already gathering above the water, and beneath them, the dry earth was beginning to change. By sunrise, the eastern pasture looked different. Not transformed, not magically green, just alive. A thin ribbon of water moved through the old channel, carrying silt toward the dry creek bed. Along its edges, insects gathered. Birds appeared in the cottonwoods. The grass around the channel had begun to soften from brown to green. Emily stood beside the fence with a cup of coffee. Atlas was 20 yards away. He wasn't drinking. He was grazing. Slowly, calmly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Jonathan Vale still stood on the porch with the purchase papers. So you're refusing? Emily nodded. I'm refusing. He looked at Dr. Reed. You've convinced her that this animal is worth more than my offer. Dr. Reed shook her head. No. Jonathan smiled. Then what? Dr. Reed looked toward the pasture. I'm telling her she hasn't discovered what it's worth yet. Jonathan folded the papers. You'll regret this. Emily said nothing. He walked to his SUV. Before leaving, he looked back at Atlas. For the first time, he wasn't laughing. Neither was Emily. The bank payment was still due Monday. The water didn't change that. The buffalo didn't change that. And genetic potential didn't automatically become money. Emily spent the weekend doing what she had always done. She worked. She repaired the north fence. She changed the hydraulic line on the John Deere 4020. She cleaned the old irrigation intake. She moved cattle away from the soft ground. And she kept records. Every morning she measured the water flow. Every evening she recorded Atlas's grazing patterns. She photographed the vegetation. She marked where native grasses returned first. Dr. Reed helped her design a simple management plan. Instead of selling Atlas, Emily would build a small conservation breeding operation around his lineage. Not a giant ranch, not a commercial feedlot. Something smaller, something careful. The first person to notice was Raymond Pike. The county inspector returned 2 weeks later. He stood beside the irrigation channel for several minutes. Then he crouched. That's native switchgrass. Emily nodded. It wasn't here before. Raymond looked toward Atlas. Your grandfather planted some of this? Not that I know of. Raymond touched the grass. Then it was probably waiting. Emily looked at him. For what? He smiled faintly. For water. That was the first time Raymond sounded less certain than everyone else. The county eventually opened the old records. The buried irrigation system had been part of a 1930s drought relief project. It had been abandoned decades later after the creek shifted. Emily's grandfather had discovered fragments of it in the 1980s. Instead of destroying the old channel, he had quietly maintained portions of it, and the buffalo lineage had been managed around the same landscape. The pieces finally fit. But one question remained. Why had Atlas been so important? The answer arrived 3 months later. Dr. Reed returned with a team of researchers. They measured Atlas, collected additional samples, studied his grazing behavior, compared his lineage with records from older bison populations. The results weren't miraculous. They were more interesting than that. Atlas carried a rare combination of traits associated with efficient forage use and strong adaptation to harsh grazing environments. His white coat made him unusual. His horns made him memorable. But his real value was hidden beneath the surface. He represented a carefully preserved line that had survived conditions that had damaged other herds. Emily finally understood what her grandfather had seen. He hadn't looked at a strange white buffalo. He had looked at a survivor. And so had Atlas. People saw dead grass. Atlas remembered water. People saw curved horns. Emily saw generations. People saw an animal worth selling. Her grandfather had seen an animal worth preserving. The bank eventually agreed to restructure Emily's loan after Dr. Reed helped document the farm's new agricultural program. The first year was still difficult. The second was harder. There were storms, a failed hay crop, a broken tractor transmission, a winter that killed several young trees. Emily nearly sold Atlas twice. Both times, she stopped herself. Then the first calves arrived. Strong, healthy, adapted. One had a pale face. Another had unusually wide horns. None were completely white, but all carried part of the lineage. Farmers began calling, not because Emily advertised, because word traveled. A rancher from Kansas wanted 2 animals. A conservation group wanted to study the herd. A university requested access to her records. And Dale Mercer? He stopped laughing. 5 years later, Emily's farm had changed. The old equipment shed had been repaired. The north pasture was healthy. The irrigation channel ran again beneath the cottonwoods. And Atlas was still there. Older, slower, but still enormous. His horns had become heavier. His white coat had developed a faint cream tint around his neck. Children from neighboring farms sometimes came to see him. They expected a monster. Instead, they found a quiet animal standing beneath a tree. Dale visited one October afternoon. He stood beside Emily at the fence. I owe you an apology. Emily looked at him. For what? For laughing. She smiled slightly. You weren't the only one. Dale watched Atlas. I thought he was worthless. Emily looked across the pasture. So did I. Dale turned. You. For about 5 minutes. That was all she said. 10 years after the day Emily found the buried plate, the farm became known for something nobody in Osage County had expected. Not the largest herd. Not the richest. Not the most modern. The most carefully managed. Emily kept the old John Deere 4020. The paint was faded. The seat had been replaced twice. The engine still needed patience on cold mornings, but it remained the machine that pulled the first section of the buried irrigation system open. She never sold it. She never sold Atlas. And she never removed the old iron plate from the pasture. She mounted it beside the barn. Underneath it, she placed her grandfather's note. East pasture. Never disturb the old line. Visitors often asked why she kept it. Emily usually gave the same answer. Because some things are worth understanding before they're worth selling. By 2028, the farm supported 3 generations of the buffalo line. The creek flowed longer into summer. Native grasses covered areas that had once been bare. The herd required less supplemental feed than comparable animals. Researchers continued studying them, and Atlas had become something nobody expected. Not a miracle, not a legend, a reminder. The animal everyone had mocked had never needed to prove himself. He had simply kept doing what his kind had done for generations. Watching, remembering, waiting. One November morning, Emily walked into the pasture before sunrise. She was 31 now. Her red hair was tucked beneath the same faded canvas cap she had worn 10 years earlier. The grass was silver with frost. The air was cold. Atlas stood near the cottonwoods. Emily stopped beside the old irrigation channel. The water moved quietly beneath a thin layer of mist. Atlas turned his head. For a moment, their eyes met. Emily smiled. Behind him, the younger buffalo began moving toward the creek. One by one, slowly. No fences rattled. No engines ran. No one laughed. The old buffalo followed, and as the morning sun reached across the pasture, his curved horns caught the first pale light. The white animal disappeared gradually into the golden grass. The water kept moving. The cattle kept walking, and the farm finally sounded like it belonged to itself again.